Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, YouTubers. This is Jerry Diamond with How to Get Out of Babylon. Okay. If I put it over here, I tend to be able to look more in the camera, even though I'm reading, so it really doesn't help. But, eye contact, eye contact. Hey, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you. Okay. If you are listening to this, you're part of the remnant. This is John Connor. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance. I stole it. Okay. The Facade. Chapter 10. This book gets more involved, more technical. Amazing how much real stuff is in here, though. Like it said, every news article, everything is real. The appendices have photographs or, facsimiles from newspaper articles from back when. UFO over Los Angeles, 1941. Coastal guns banging away at it for 45 minutes, destroying a lot of homes, not touching the UFO. UFO flight 1952 over Washington, D.C., I believe. 1948, maybe. Anyway. All right. Chapter 10. Man's mind is so formed that it is far more susceptible to falsehood than to truth. Desiderius Erasmus, great Reformation scholar that preceded Luther and right before Luther and had a lot to do with the text of the Bible. The colonel cleared his throat and the team members not already seated began moving toward the table. If I could have your attention now that all the appropriate parties are present, we can get to know each other properly. Ooh. Appropriate parties present, get to know each other properly. I'm sure you remember some of your comrades' names from our earlier get-together, but today's program will include more formal introductions. And in case you're wondering about the 2 vacant seats, the rest of the team will be introduced to you when that becomes necessary. Neil opened his briefcase and withdrew a stack of 10 by 13 manila envelopes. He rose from his seat, glancing at the label on each envelope and handing it to its designee. Please wait to open the materials Dr. Banstra is handing out. We'll be getting to the contents therein momentarily. I want to first introduce myself again briefly for those who were not present at the other meeting and bring some preliminary details to your attention. My name is Colonel Vernon Ferguson, the officer continued, and I'm a 32-year veteran of the United States Air Force, a former combat pilot and intelligence officer. You've already all met Dr. Banstra, one of the Defense Department's undersecretaries and the civilian director of this project. He answers only to myself in the chain of command. I trust you will all give him the appropriate respect. What about the commander-in-chief, or maybe even that Constitution thing? Deidre interrupted sarcastically, visibly agitated. Brian was taken aback by her overt hostility, particularly in light of the contrast to his own introduction to her just a few minutes ago. It didn't take too much imagination to conclude that her interjection marked a continuation of the antagonism to which Malcolm had alluded. Ah, yes, Dr. Harper, the colonel said with a confident air. I see that you're determined to pick up where you left off. I apologize once again for the painful disruption this project has caused in your life. And I sympathize with your concern for legal protocol. Tell me, Doctor, you are familiar with the phrase plausible deniability, are you not? He asked condescendingly. The woman responded with only a smirk, arms folded across her chest. Well then, for your benefit, as well as the rest of your colleagues, I must inform you that your government, at least as you are familiar with it, has no knowledge of this project. Plausible deniability is, in this case, absolutely plausible. Using another term you may have heard, this is a black op. Every dollar spent on this project is undetectable to those who hold the purse strings of congressional budgetary oversight. It is certainly true, Dr. Harper, that the President, as well as most of the elected members of Congress, have no knowledge of what you'll be working on. And contrary to what you may be thinking, it's all entirely legal. If I deemed it necessary, documentation from both the National Security Decision Directives and United Nations Security Council resolutions could be produced for your reading pleasure. I want to see them, Deidre demanded defiantly. The entire rationale I sketched for you, he continued, has been in existence since the 40s. Then President Truman had the foresight to move certain operations beyond the grasp of his own office, since the duties of that office are often carried out under political duress or expediency, depending on one's perspective, and the outcomes of national elections. The public has a right to know whatever it is you're hiding, Deidre continued, not content to let the colonel have the last word. No, it doesn't, the colonel suddenly erupted and slammed his fist onto the podium, jolting his antagonist in her seat. We're talking about matters of national security that have always been exempt from public or journalistic scrutiny. No one has a right to know anything concerning this project except those of you in this room. The room fell completely silent, the team members transfixed upright in their chairs like a bunch of scared Marine recruits on the first day of boot camp. Brian unconsciously held his breath as he watched the colonel stroll around the table like General Patton inspecting some petrified draftees. Malcolm's description of the tension had only been the tip of the iceberg. And if you do your jobs well, he continued in a calm, assured voice, if you're worth the confidence your country has in you, if you're really as good as you think you are, the public that you and I care so deeply about will get what it really wants, the security of the status quo. You represent the key to guiding the citizens of this country through an impending crisis of which, at the present, they are blissfully unaware. The colonel sauntered back to the podium and straightened his uniform. Brian hadn't appreciated the tongue-lashing any more than anyone else in the room, but he couldn't help admiring the man's commanding presence. Now, the colonel resumed his introduction. If you'd like to find out why I've bothered to reveal this much to you already and what exactly you've been selected to work on, I'll thank you ahead of time for withholding any irrelevant comments or questions. Is that understood? Brian almost expected someone to salute, but no one at the table moved or spoke. Good. Look around you at your academic colleagues. You'll notice something immediately. The 7 of you, with the exception of the good father, are in your 30s. Besides something as obvious and superficial as your age, you all possess earned doctorates from some of the most prestigious universities in the world, and were regarded by your professors and the group as the brightest young minds in your respective fields. Each of you is also single and has no children. In addition, your parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles are deceased. With one exception, you have been continuously surveilled for at least 2 months, and in some cases much longer. The content of your conventional mail, email, internet usage, and phone records all helped us conclude that none of you has any relationship with anyone that could be considered close. You see, we were not only looking for sharp minds, but individuals who would not be readily missed. At least not right away. Why did you go through the trouble to place our financial records under government accounting control? Brian ventured to ask, eyeing the other team members, or is that just something that was done to me? The panicked expressions on the faces of several of his associates revealed to Brian immediately that this was a new revelation to the others. Only Father Benedict seemed detached. No, Dr. Scott, you're not alone, the colonel replied, looking Brian in the eye, unperturbed by the inquiry. The group has indeed taken the same liberty with each of your records. So glad you asked, the colonel, unflappable, answered. The facility in which you are housed is completely equipped with a full hospital and staffed by the military's top personal physicians. Consequently, your health insurance has been subsumed by the military. Your regular salaries are being electronically funneled to new personal accounts according to whatever schedule your outside employer has created. I'm not sure I read that. What gives you the right to our privacy? Deidre exploded again, indignantly. Only this time, her sentiments were immediately echoed by a majority of the others. Okay, if I missed that. Your monthly bills have all been converted to an electronic payment format, each payment being deducted from your account. Lastly, $100,000 has been placed into individual savings accounts as payment for your services on this project. Do you have any objections, Dr. Harper? Yes. How do we know this isn't just bullshit? A private access code to your accounts was sent to your computers via email this morning. You can use it to access those accounts and verify what I've said. Please remember to open the message by this evening, since we will be deleting it from the system at midnight. Dr. Scott, does that satisfy your curiosity as well? Brian nodded readily, more than a little overwhelmed by the money. I take it that the rest of you are more at ease now? The colonel asked, reviewing his audience. No one uttered a word. Now, on to the next line of business. I'm sure you won't be surprised when I tell you that it is mandatory that before I go any farther, you take an oath of secrecy. The security oath required for this level of clearance is on the first page of the materials enclosed in the envelopes before you. Please remove only the first page and sign the form. I will collect them now. The team members began opening their envelopes. What makes you so sure we're going to sign them? A striking auburn-haired woman seated next to Deidre asked, her envelope untouched. Dressed in a double-breasted olive business suit, she was unmistakably the object of Malcolm's earlier comments in the cafeteria. Her classic oval face was surrounded by impeccably bobbed hair, styled off her forehead to reveal an understated widow's peak. The speaker's now pursed lips had a barely discernible pout, and her green eyes were positively mesmerizing. She wore little makeup. She didn't need it. Malcolm hadn't exaggerated. I believe you already know the answer to your question, Dr. Kelly. You have no choice. The colonel's bold statement caught the attention of everyone. Expressions of anger and annoyance formed again on the faces of the team members. He's right, the woman agreed, turning her attention away from the colonel's gaze to the others seated at the table. Unless I miss my guess, the rest of the contents of the envelopes in front of you may contain some blackmailing scheme similar to the one handed to me when I was, how do you say, recruited for this patriotic venture. Her voice dripped with sarcasm, but her look told everyone she wasn't kidding. The others immediately withdrew the contents of their envelopes and began shuffling through the documents. This is unconscionable. Whatever. A wiry, bearded man with curly red hair exclaimed, These are absolute fabrications. I've been here almost a year, so why is this necessary now? What are you trying to do, ruin my career? How many years do you suppose you can live on $100,000? Malcolm spoke up cynically, scanning the contents of his envelope. If anyone in my profession ever saw this, I'd be completely unemployable. The mood of the team grew more irate, but the colonel had yet to make any attempt to intervene. Brian looked up from the pages he had drawn from his envelope. He looked directly at Neil, whose attention had been riveted on his friend as soon as he'd reached for the envelope. There was sorrow in the older man's gaze. His expression pleaded for understanding. Brian held his tongue. The colonel finally motioned for quiet and began to speak, once it was obtained. You should all know that the group has no intention of ever making any of these allegations public. You have our word that as long as you abide by your oath of secrecy, none of what you've read will ever surface. On the other hand, if you refuse to sign the oath, sabotage the project in any way, divulge any information concerning the project, at any time, as long as you're alive, these records will be made public. How long does it take you guys to dream up this bullshit and produce the paper trail to legitimize these lies? The red-haired man growled angrily. And I still want to know why this wasn't necessary when we began our work. We've worked together before, and I've never had to sign anything like this before. You've also never had this high a security clearance, Dr. Chadwick. Brian took immediate note of his identity. The material, of course, is completely untrue, but thanks to the magic of electronic information retrieval and storage, it is a painfully easy thing to do. Say, fatten your bank account and alter the records of your employer to make it appear as though you've had a problem with embezzling, or that you cooked the numbers on the research project that won your company a key government contract, or that you plagiarized in your dissertation. The possibilities really are endless, he explained matter-of-factly. Why don't you just kill us when we're done? Malcolm cracked cynically. The colonel gazed intently at the lanky scientist, his lips pursed tightly together. After a few awkward seconds, everyone in the room knew that he wasn't searching for an answer. The implication was obvious. Brian couldn't tell if the swallow he heard was his own or someone else's. Gulp. Let's just hope that never becomes necessary.